All right, welcome back. This is the fourth and last presentation on state and local government. Again, this is a bottom-up look at the dynamics of federalism and how they work within our system of government, the different responsibilities and things that states and local governments do for citizens. So state and local governments rely on a variety of funding sources, but at the same time, the amount of money coming in is their capacity to draw in huge sums of money is constrained compared to the federal government. That is despite the fact that local governments spend quite a bit of money. Remember, there are 4,000 county governments, there are 80,000 plus, probably 90,000 plus local governments. They annually spend in excess of $1 trillion, so that's a lot of money. Americans are generally ambivalent about taxation. The conventional wisdom is that no one likes paying taxes. A great deal of the dissatisfaction over taxation is driven by the belief that a lot of Americans think other Americans are not paying their fair share, and whether that be corporations that are very wealthy among liberals or whether it be low-income Americans among conservatives. What public opinion surveys reveal about Americans' attitudes towards taxation is complicated, frankly. Over 100 million Americans love tax days because they deliberately withhold more than they owe, and therefore they get a big refund from the federal government. Americans widely agree that tax evasion is wrong, and only 6% of Americans polled think it's okay to not report all of their income. So again, in effect, most Americans acknowledge the necessity of taxation. Some might view it as a necessary evil, but nevertheless, it's something that we need in order to have an effective government. Partisanship influences what Americans think constitutes a fair share of taxes. Again, more conservative people are more inclined to support a more flat tax. More liberal and progressive folks are more inclined to favor a more progressive tax, where the higher income people pay a higher proportion of their income in taxes. State and local governments rely on a variety of funding sources. Revenue capacity is an important thing to consider, and that again reflects the ability of the government to fund their operations. So a number of factors contribute to an individual state's revenue capacity: the population size, the rural-urban distribution of population, tax and revenue capacity, public service infrastructure, things like that. Again, a lot of people here in Oklahoma say we should have a tax scheme like Texas. Well, Texas has 4 times our population. It's not as likely to be effective here as it would be in Texas, which is a much more populous state. They have more human capital. Most state constitutions mandate a balanced budget. Most local governments charters also require a balanced budget, and that imposes limits on what they can do in any particular, in responding to crises and in responding to economic downturns. Oftentimes, for example, local governments have to cut their public safety budgets at precisely the time when they need more cops on the street, because there's a strong correlation between economic, recessions and spikes in crime. Ratification of the 16th Amendment changed the relationship between federal and state governments. Again, the 16th Amendment basically, legalized a federal income tax. States followed suit, but again, states don't tax it at as high a rate, and the federal government simply has a much greater ability to take in trillions of dollars of income. So both state and local governments increasingly find themselves relying on sales taxes, which is a highly regressive tax environment. And again, in practical terms, what that means is that if you're taxing sales primarily for your revenue, the people that spend most of their money are the ones that are paying the most in their taxes. Again, people with lots and lots of discretionary income can save. And most of them do. So that basically means that the tax burden falls more heavily on lower income inhabitants. State budgets focus generally on a few very important issues. States' annual budget cycles begin with executive agency budget requests, which frequently lead to high-profile agencies making dramatic appeals for huge increases. This happened with Joe Albaugh, who was the Oklahoma director of prisons. He basically said, we can't operate unless we get our budget tripled, and they never did it, and eventually he just quit in frustration. States operate within a budgetary fiscal year, reflecting the state's tax and budgetary obligations. Budgetary appropriations must be evaluated considering actual tax receipts. That's a process known as equalization. You have to make sure that the economy is performing as well as you would anticipate. Governor's ability to control the budgetary process through the veto, it varies across states. Some states give their governors a line item veto, which means they can balance budgets by excising portions of the appropriation process. Up in Wisconsin, the guy up there, Tony Evers, the governor, used a line item veto to dramatically increase education spending, something that a lot of Republicans in the state legislature were very angry about. So on average, most state budgets are devoted to 4 basic issues: education, Medicare and children's health, higher education, and transportation. So that's what it boils down to. Educating children, educating for, work, and then healthcare, and then roads. Those are the big things. Local governments confront even greater fiscal constraints. In 2018, local governments spent over $1.4 trillion. The largest local governments at the county level, again, focus on public safety and rural road construction and maintenance, and are funded primarily through what are known as ad valorem taxes, and those are taxes on owned property. Cities and towns get their revenues from sales taxes, fees, and transfers, and provide a variety of essential services. They're responsible for electricity and lots of other things. There is a dark side to local government budgetary shortfalls. While some local governments rely on contracting to cover budget shortfalls, others develop legally dubious strategies where local government enlists local law enforcement and municipal judges to deliberately target low-income residents, to charge them with minor traffic violations and force them to pay exorbitant fines. That's ultimately what was found was going on in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, when a federal investigation after the death of a young black teenager due to a police shooting, basically uncovered what was going on there. And again, the black population of Ferguson, Missouri felt like they were being targeted because they were being targeted. Americans' experience of taxation, again, varies widely from state to state. Americans, on average, pay far less in taxation than citizens in other democratic nations with advanced economies. Higher population states pay far more in taxes than Americans living in rural states. Higher income and a higher living standard bring with it greater levels of taxation. Are Americans overtaxed? Well, it really depends on where you live and what standard of living you prefer. There are, again, Oklahoma has the 47th lowest tax burden among the 50 states. And again, several factors feed the widely shared perception among Americans that they are overtaxed. And again, the wide variance in tax burden and living standards, should be understood as a feature, not a bug, of federalism. As the late political scientist Aaron Vildosky observed, diversity lies at the heart of federalism. It is inequality of result, not merely in income, with some states choosing high tax, high services, and others the opposite, but also in lifestyle that distinguishes federalism as a living system from federalism as a front for unitary power. Electoral competition at the state and local government is increasingly becoming fierce. Highly collaborative relationships between federal, state, and local governments produced a golden age of intergovernmental relations in the 1960s. That period subsequently produced a backlash in the form of a conservative movement dedicated to breaking that relationship and returning more power to the states. A partisan realignment in the late 1960s gave Republicans a durable electoral advantage in the solid South. and that, in turn fed a variety of Republican ideological projects, which I'll talk about again in a minute. In state elections, Republicans broke through in 2006 and in 2010. Again, you had dramatic congressional losses in 2006 and 2008 as a result of the final years of the Bush administration, lots and lots of financial crises. You ended up with the startling success of what became known as the Red Map Project. They invested about $30 million in 107 of 6,000 state legislative races, and it proved remarkably successful, and Republicans won 700 state legislative seats, with Republicans winning control of at least one House in 39 of the 50 state legislatures. Democratic success at the federal level was countered by huge losses in state government, and there have been far-reaching consequences of this increased partisan competition at the state level. Again, roughly 1/5 of Americans now live in states entirely controlled by either Democratic or Republican parties. Number two, one-party domination frequently reinforces uncompetitive elections. 3, increasingly, one-party domination encourages politicians to adopt more and more extreme positions. 4, one-party domination lays the groundwork for increasing political corruption. And 5, Republicans in particular have increasingly used state control of state legislatures to restrict voting rights, particularly in mission-critical states like Florida and Texas, and states that have recently become more competitive like Arizona and Georgia. The 2018 and 2020 elections, the Republicans were determined to build a red wall to ensure prolonged GOP domination of the House of Representatives at the federal level. The role of what is known as the American Legislative Exchange Council, otherwise known as ALEC, and the rise of, again, partisan gerrymandering. You had the GOP erosion of support among college-educated women, largely as a result of the presidency of Donald Trump, which was an important component of the GOP loss of the House of Representatives in 2018. The challenges of running the 2020 congressional and presidential elections amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, there were significant challenges. Mostly they were overcome, oftentimes in ways that have subsequently been struck down because, again, Republicans have chosen to prefer not to have high turnout elections. 2020 election trends in the Sooner State. I'm going to conclude briefly with a 2022 thing. Following the 2018 erosion, where Democrats made some gains in the legislature, Oklahoma's status as a deep red state was reaffirmed by the 2020 elections. Oklahoma's demographics are uniquely suited to Republican ideological appeals. Oklahoma is comprised of a largely rural, white, and non-college educated population, many of whom identify as strongly religious. These are demographic groupings that have proven to be most loyal to Donald Trump. Voter turnout in Oklahoma remains disturbingly low due to, again, certain demographic realities. Younger people vote at lower levels, as do low-income Americans, and Oklahoma has a very high degree of poverty. Oklahoma is likely to remain a one-party dominant state for the near future. That doesn't seem to be likely to be overcome by anything that's currently in the environment. In 2022, Republicans believed that they would retake the House of Representatives at the federal level. They achieved that, but not nearly with the success that they hoped. They hoped for a red wave, but again, for a variety of reasons. Again, largely owing to the kind of the overhang of the Dobbs decision, which struck down Roe versus Wade. A lot of women began, basically voicing their unhappiness with that Supreme Court decision. So that's it for state and local government. When we come back, we will move on to two very important related chapters, civil rights and civil liberties. See you next time.